There is a particular kind of exhaustion that quiet people know well. It is not the exhaustion of doing too much. It is the exhaustion of being constantly misread. You sit in a room full of people and you are paying attention, genuinely, carefully paying attention, and someone leans over and asks if you are okay. You say yes. They do not quite believe you. The conversation moves on, and you are left holding something that was never yours to carry, the assumption that your silence signals a problem. This video is not about convincing the world to appreciate you. It is about understanding what is actually happening inside that silence, why it works the way it does, and why the people who live there are not missing something. They are carrying something most people never develop. Let us start where the misunderstanding begins. When a person speaks constantly, the world treats that as evidence of engagement. Participation is measured in volume. Confidence is measured in how quickly someone fills a pause. In this framework, the quiet person appears to be losing a game they never agreed to play. But there is a different framework entirely, and it has been described by some of the most rigorous thinkers in the history of psychology and philosophy. Within that framework, silence is not absence. It is a form of architecture. It is the structure inside which real perception becomes possible. Carl Jung spent decades mapping the interior life. He was not a quiet man in the sense of being timid or withdrawn. He was quiet in the sense that he took the inner world as seriously as the outer one, perhaps more seriously. Jung drew a fundamental distinction between the person who directs their energy outward toward people and events, and the person who directs it inward toward meaning and pattern. He called these orientations extroversion and introversion, and he was careful to say that neither was superior. But he noticed something important about the introverted type. They tend to process experience more completely before responding to it. This is not slowness. This is depth. When a quiet person watches an interaction unfold, they are not passively observing. They are running a kind of continuous internal analysis, reading tone, tracking inconsistency, noticing what is said against what is felt in the room. Jung would describe this as a heightened relationship with the unconscious, a greater permeability between what is happening on the surface and what is moving underneath. The quiet person is often the one in the room who knows what is really going on. They simply choose not to announce it. And that choice, the decision to hold perception rather than broadcast it, is where the invisible emotional labor begins. Consider what it costs to notice everything and say little. You observe a friend performing happiness they do not feel. You register the tension in a conversation that everyone else is pretending does not exist. You sense the moment a relationship begins to shift, long before anyone names it. You carry all of this. You process it. You file it somewhere inside yourself. Because the social contract does not have a clear place for the person who says, quietly, I noticed that. This is not a small thing. It is a continuous, largely unacknowledged form of emotional work. And because it happens internally, because it leaves no visible trace, it tends to go unrecognized, even by the people doing it. Nietzsche had a name for the individuals who live this way. He called them the solitary ones, and he did not mean it as an insult. Spoke Zarathustra. He described a type of person who cannot find their home in the noise of the crowd, not because they are broken, but because they are oriented towards something the crowd has not yet reached. The solitary one, in Nietzsche's sense, is not lonely by failure. They are alone by direction. Their attention is aimed somewhere that requires distance from the constant performance of social life. Nietzsche was suspicious of the herd, not because he despised people, but because he understood how easily the pressure to conform flattens genuine perception.
When you must always be performing, always filling silence, always signaling your presence through noise, you lose access to the quieter signals, the ones that tell you what you actually think, what you actually value, what is actually true about a situation. The solitary ones, the quiet ones, retain that access. It is their particular form of clarity. The Stoics approached this from a different angle, but arrived at a similar place. Marcus Aurelius, writing alone in his private journals he never intended for anyone else to read, returned again and again to the idea that the interior life is the only territory a person truly governs. Everything outside is subject to forces beyond your control. Everything inside is yours, if you are willing to do the work of knowing it. For the Stoics, stillness was not passivity, it was discipline. The ability to remain composed while the world around you generates noise and urgency was considered one of the highest expressions of human character. Epictetus, who had every external reason to be reactive, he was enslaved, he was physically harmed, wrote about the extraordinary freedom available to anyone who learns to govern their own response rather than being governed.
Governed by circumstance. Quiet people, in this sense, are practicing something ancient.
The stillness that others misread as disengagement is often a trained capacity to remain present without being swept away. It is not that nothing is happening. It is that what is happening is being held rather than scattered. Now consider what silence actually communicates when you stop reading it as absence. When a quiet person chooses not to speak, they are often making a precise decision. They are deciding that what they have to say requires the right moment, the right listener, the right conditions. This is not timidity. It is discernment. The person who speaks carefully tends to mean what they say. The person who fills every silence tends to be managing anxiety as much as communicating. Neither is wrong, but they are doing different things, and the world has a habit of rewarding the louder version while overlooking the more precise one. There is also something that happens in the presence of a genuinely quiet person that is difficult to name, but easy to feel. People tend to say more. They tend to go deeper. The quiet person's willingness to hold space, to not rush in, to not redirect, to simply remain present, creates a kind of permission for honesty. This is why quiet people are often the ones others seek out when something real needs to be said. Not because they have the loudest voice, but because their silence is safe. Jung described this as the capacity to hold the tension of opposites, to be present with complexity without immediately resolving it into something simpler. Most people are uncomfortable with unresolved complexity. They want to name it, categorize it, move past it. The quiet person can sit with it. And in that sitting, something often becomes clear.
Rushing would have destroyed.
If you recognize yourself in any of this, there is something worth saying directly. The exhaustion you feel is real. The labor of noticing everything, of processing deeply, of holding what others release, that is real work, and it deserves to be acknowledged, even if only by you. You are not behind, you are not broken, you are not failing at a version of life that was never designed for how you actually function. What you carry is not a burden you need to put down. It is a capacity you have not yet fully claimed. The quiet ones throughout history, the observers, the thinkers, the ones who stayed at the edge of the fire and watched, they were not the ones who missed the point. They were often the ones who understood it most completely. They simply understood it in a register that the noise around them could not hear. Reclaiming your quiet does not mean becoming louder. It means recognizing that what happens in your silence has value, not despite the fact that it goes unannounced, but sometimes precisely because of it. The world will keep mistaking the stillness for emptiness. That is not your problem to solve. Your work is to know what is actually there and to trust it. Inside the labyrinth, that is where we begin. And if this spoke to a part of you that rarely gets heard, stay with that feeling for a moment. You are not broken because you feel deeply. You are only beginning to understand yourself. Subscribe to Inside the Labyrinth for more reflections on the hidden patterns of the human mind.